All right. Welcome to episode 65 of the Jake Blanchard podcast. As always, quick shout outs. We got two sponsors here. First one is Stream2C. They make sunscreen and personal care products. They were voted the #1 mineral-based sunscreen by Rolling Stone magazine. The code JBP at checkout gets you 10% off your order. And also Fellowship Brand, longtime sponsor of the podcast. They make premium men's grooming products, oils, balms, butters, tattoo oils, and more. Go to fellowshipbrand.com, use the code JBP at checkout, get yourself 10% off all those grooming products. All right. My guest today, Tayler Tibbitts. He's an entrepreneur, an outdoorsman, and a family man. He currently serves as Empire Title's general counsel. He also manages the company's commercial department. He also owns and operates his own software development company. It's called Got Game Technologies, and it develops technology, applications, mobile apps for the hunting industry. Super cool stuff here. The guy's active in the community. He's on the board of the Boise Valley Habitat for Humanity, gym prep charter schools. He also serves as the Urban Renewal Agency Commissioner for the city of Kuna, just outside of Boise, Idaho. Coaches wrestling, flag football. He's a pretty cool guy. I've known him for a couple of years now. He's got a mantra. It's just work hard and be kind, something that I love so much. So welcome to the show, Tayler.
Man, Jake, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Love what you're doing.
Thanks, man. Hey, you recently also, I didn't talk about it in the intro, but you recently just got a recognition of 40 under 40, right? For Idaho.
I did. Yeah. Humbled, but thankful. Not why we do it, but it's fun to get a little recognition, I guess.
Absolutely, man. It's I feel like you're everywhere. I run into you in Boise every now and then. I ran into you downtown not too long ago. That's how we started talking, and I asked you to come on to the podcast. But what's all this civic involvement about, man? What are you doing out there? What are you trying to do?
You know, it's just something that I guess that I have a hard time saying no, or been in a position work-wise where I can handle some additional commitments like that. Probably a mix of the two, but I just find a lot of purpose in, getting to know folks in the community and finding ways to either to give back or to work on projects that I find fun and interesting. So that's kind of what drives my community involvement. And I'm a small town kid, maybe something to do with that, where you just grow up around other people and everybody and just want to engage.
Yeah. And where did you grow up originally?
So I grew up in Salmon, Idaho. That's where I graduated from high school and spent a lot of my formative years. My dad was a large animal veterinarian, and we did have a couple of moves. He went to vet school at Washington State, and he and my mom married young. And so I was a couple of years old when he started vet school, and was just ready to start kindergarten when we moved from Pullman. And then he started his veterinary practice in northern Utah for a while around all those dairies. And then eventually we moved up to Salmon, and that's kind of where I call home.
Oh, very cool. And you're out there, you're here in Boise. You're married. You married your high school sweetheart, I understand.
Yep. She grew up in Salmon as well. So small town girl, and we've had a lot of fun in sort of chasing our dreams together. And we live in Kuna now, so we're kind of out in a small town again, although that's growing and changing a little bit as the rest of the valley is. But yeah, just living the dream.
For sure, man. And I'm, something we share in common. I married my high school sweetheart as well.
That's awesome.
When I moved to Alaska when I was 10, my now wife, Megan, she sat next to me in my 4th grade class. So I remember first day of 4th grade looking over and seeing her, I remember her. I remember that first day. Those are interesting times, but we didn't start dating till junior year, but we've been together a better part of 17 years.
Yeah, that's well, Kayla and we started dating as juniors as well, and had known each other before that. And I, like you, remember the first day we met. We actually met at church, which is kind of funny. But eventually kind of grew into something more than friends, and the rest is history.
You got a couple kids too, don't you?
Yeah, we got a couple times 2.5. 10 these days or so, I hear, but
5 is a few, man.
Keeping us busy, and it's definitely a lifestyle choice, I guess. But they give us so much purpose in what we do and how we live.
And what's the age ranges on those kids?
So we're going to have a 7th grader this year. 12-year-old is our oldest. Yeah, I'm feeling like an old man. He's always been a really sweet and responsible kid, but even sweet and responsible kids turn into teenagers. And so we're getting into the eye rolls and all that. But
no.
yeah, he's still awesome. He's great. We do a lot of cool things together. So he's 12, and then we go all the way down to almost 2-year-old. So 4 boys, 1 girl. Our daughter Savannah is 4, so second to last, and she kind of runs our house. She's got all of us lined out.
I love it. Well, hey, I per the intro, there's a couple of avenues that we're going to explore here together, and just love to learn more about your journey, your perspective on life. I can't wait to get into the hunting conversation. I've been waiting for a guest for a while to come on and educate me a little bit on that world. But let's start out with the fact that you're general counsel. Typically, that means that you're a lawyer of some kind.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that career path and why you chose to go. I was assuming so, but I don't know. I don't know if you can be a general counsel without going to law school. I don't think you can.
No, and I was more joking about the of some kind part, because I've definitely taken a non-traditional path from the usual course, but it kind of goes back to a 2-year mission that I did in Taiwan for my church. Before that, I was interested in, something along the lines of what my dad did, veterinary medicine, or, something along that. But lived in Taiwan, learned Mandarin Chinese, spent 2 years over there on the other side of the world. And just for an Idaho kid to realize how much smaller the world is than I actually thought, it just opened up a lot of doors mentally for me. And I started thinking about, what I really wanted to do and how I wanted to help people and build a life and build a career. And I came back from Taiwan and immediately started, I met a guy actually flying back from Taiwan who studied accounting in college and then went to law school. And he actually didn't finish law school, but it got the wheels turning for me about how that approach would work well with my background living in Taiwan and speaking Chinese. And I thought, man, international business attorney who speaks Chinese, can write his own ticket. And, ultimately an Idaho kid finds his way back to Idaho pretty quickly, but for a lot of us. But anyways, that's what got the process started for me to go to law school. We went out to University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Absolutely loved it out there.
Yeah.
UVA, a cool school with so much history, and loved learning about Thomas Jefferson and how he founded that institution and everything that comes with that. Had some great opportunities coming out of law school, was able to work for a year worked for a summer for Judge Windmill in Boise after my first year of law school. And that's what put Boise on the map for us. And then my second summer, I worked for a law firm in Washington, D.C., Williams and Connolly, a great trial litigation firm, and had an opportunity to return and work for those guys after law school, but had already started to kind of feel that pull back to Idaho. My wife and I had started our family at a young age, and we had 2 kids by the time we graduated already. And raising a big family in a city like DC is not easy. And I know people do it and do a great job at it, but for us, we wanted to get back closer to home. So I worked for a 9th Circuit judge in Pocatello for a year, and traveled with him when he had court, in California and Washington, et cetera, and got some great experience. And then finally, we managed to get over to Boise, and I joined a law firm, work in civil litigation. And that was kind of a traditional route to that point for an attorney. Go to a good law school, clerk for a judge, and then join a law firm and bill a lot of hours. And that's kind of when I started to really get to know myself as an individual and what I wanted. And it didn't totally coincide with that traditional model. And, attorneys, and I think a lot of people, interested in a profession, whether it's accounting or law, engineering, something like that, kind of type A, like you follow the conventional wisdom, you don't take risks, you put in your time and ultimately become a partner at your firm. And it didn't take me long to realize that I loved business development. I loved client relationships, and a big law firm. They rely on associates to produce that widget, those billable hours, to help with the firm overhead. And I get that and can understand that. And it takes time to become an attorney capable of managing those customer relationships. But, whether it was the way I was raised, had a dad who was an entrepreneur, ran his own vet practice, or that I started my family, young or whatever it was. I just was interested in more responsibility early in my career. And so knew pretty early on after joining the firm that I needed to find something a little bit different to do. And as life has it, you never know when you're going to meet somebody that has an influence on how your life turns out. And through a golf group that I'd started called Business Links Boise. It wasn't called that at the time, but got to know Chris Miller, who was the state president for Next Title. And he and I met, around that 1.5 year mark at the firm, and just got to talking and kind of hammered out a position for me at the company that transitioned me out of the law firm realm into title and escrow business and kind of set me on the course I'm on now.
So I didn't really understand that like title and escrow businesses retain general counsel on staff. And so, educate me on that, just because I actually just kind of went and refied a house recently. Yeah. The rates are great. I just went through that process today, oddly enough. And so like, what is that role like in title and escrow?
It's totally off the radar for most attorneys, but there are actually a lot of attorneys that work in the business. Title insurance is kind of a unique insurance product, and you have title agents as well as title underwriters. And on the underwriting side, you're evaluating risk and transactions and dealing with a lot more specific real estate law issues. And so you see attorneys pulled into that space for sure. On the title agency side, though, typically there's going to be an attorney involved. Just because we're involved with real estate transactions, and unique legal issues pop up constantly, whether it's a family law issue, someone's getting divorced and they need to sell their house. And how do you make sure, because Idaho is a community property state, that, that the properties are provided.
What does that mean, community property state? What's the difference?
Yeah. So community property state is where there's a presumption that when a couple gets married, they own property together. And then there has to be certain things that occur to rebut that presumption and keep the property separate. And then other states are the inverse, where it's presumed that it's separate property unless it's commingled, clearly established that it's meant to be part of that marital estate. So because Idaho's community property state, when a couple gets divorced, they both typically have an interest in the property, and certain procedures have to be followed to make sure that when it's sold, that one spouse isn't left out or left on title, in a way that might damage the interest of the subsequent owners. So title insurance, is protecting against risks involved with, claims on title that parties wouldn't otherwise be aware of, and researching it, insuring against that problem. And then the escrow side is involved with making sure that the funds associated with the transaction are paid out appropriately to all the different parties. So as the attorney in that world, there are just a pretty wide variety of legal issues that can come up, either derail a transaction or slow it down. So try to have an attorney on hand to draft up documents or jump in and problem solve or talk people off the ledge and keep things moving along.
All right. So we've established now, you're a family man, you got 5 kids, you're a lawyer, you're working in a really interesting space from a legal perspective. And you're also an outdoorsman. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on. You started a company, and I talked about it in the intro, called Got Game Technologies. Dude, what is this about? Why did you start this company? And like, how do you find time, and what's it all about? Like, let's start peeling this thing back for me.
All right. Yeah, there are a few layers to peel back there. Somewhere along the way of this transition from kind of the conventional lawyering career to joining the title business, I kind of realized that, I have that entrepreneurial drive. And so I've been interested in starting a business, since around then. You start talking with friends or colleagues or family about business ideas. And I think a lot of people do that. But then actually being willing to pull the trigger and do something is kind of where you have to have enough risk tolerance and the right personality to actually give it a go. And so I didn't grow up thinking I would start businesses, but that's definitely something that's become a thing for me, I guess. And so Got Game Technologies wasn't the first company I started. I actually started a fence construction company in the spring of 2017. And my brother and I started building fences on the side. And my wife was pregnant with our 4th child, and we had some subcontractors walk off a couple of jobs, and I had to go personally, finish a couple of fencing jobs on a Sunday evening, and my cell phone died and the truck battery died, and I worked until 10:30, and I was in a shady neighborhood, if Boise has one. It was, and I got home that night, and she was like, all right, you got a good job, man. We don't need the stress of a fencing operation. And so my brother and I kind of, it's still a very viable business model. I think someone could start a fencing company in Boise and absolutely crush it. But anyways, I had to table it. So the fencing dream kind of got crushed. And I went on my, I'd gone on my first archery elk hunt somewhere around that time, and grown up hunting deer and elk with the rifle, but never archery elk. And that's really the key, because you hunt elk during the rut, and they're just incredible animals. And during the rut, they're bugling. And if you've never heard one in the woods, like up close, it's hard to describe just how like hair raising, goose bumping, like just heart thumping of an experience it is. They're just incredible creatures. And
the rut is mating season, right?
It is. Yep.
Okay.
So the bulls are willing to establish their pecking order, to show their dominance among other bulls, as well as to ultimately entice cows to breed. And then they build their harem, defend it from other bulls. And these, as I've learned later through this company that I developed and partnered with some really excellent elk callers and hunters, that you're capitalizing on those instincts as a hunter in order to convince a bull elk to come into bow range. So I was hunting with a friend, and his father-in-law was with us, who was just a great elk caller. And I thought, man, I've got to find a way to learn more about this, how to do it, how to have these close encounters and this awesome experience as a hunter. It just brought hunting to a new level for me. More of just a close connection, I guess, with the animals that we're pursuing. And so I listened to a podcast by the Exo Mountain Gear team. They're a Boise-based hunting backpack company, Steve Speck and Lenny Nelson, and good dudes. And I had known them from my time at the law firm, and heard about a podcast they did with a guy called the Elk Nut. And he's just so passionate about elk. And so I called him up and asked him if they could put me in touch with this Elk Nut guy. And I talked to, his name's Paul Medell, and I talked to Paul and kind of had the makings of an idea about an app that would teach hunters how to call elk, and help them kind of start from the very basics and build up. And I'm not a software developer. I've never, I've done a little coding in Excel with Visual Basic, but I can't build an app. But I talked to Paul about the idea, and he was interested. And I thought, all right, I got to find a way to get this app built. And kind of serendipitously, one of my neighbors was a software developer, and met him one evening and started chatting about this business idea. I don't even know how it came up. And it came out that he was a developer and had a little free time and was kind of an entrepreneur. Anyways, he said, I've got a little time on my hands. Let's give this thing a go. And so that's when it started. And we started gathering content from this expert, the Elk Nut. And we shot our first set of videos for the app in my front living room. And there's the brick fireplace. And then my wife has the fireplace decorated with flowers and stuff. But I had gone and bought a picture of a bull elk from Sportsman's for $40 and set it on the top of the hearth. And so we shoot the videos, and Paul is so passionate about elk, but he hadn't done a lot of on-time camera in that type of a setting where it's not, it's just very stationary. He shot a lot of videos in the field and was very good, but the stationary setting was a little bit of a new thing. And so anyways, we shot a whole day from my living room, and then we scrapped it, and we're like, those videos weren't what we needed, and ended up using the Exo Mountain Gear building to shoot our first set of videos for the first version of the app we ultimately used, and then had formed a great relationship with those guys that kind of led to developing this app. Started small, trying to teach hunters 5 basic elk sounds, what they mean, how to make them, when to use them, through videos, audio recordings of elk and the expert, and then written tips that kind of brought it all together. And launched it in it was July of 2017, and had a lot of success initially. Doubled the amount of calls on the app, and raised the price from $5 to $10, and saw our downloads continue to increase. It was almost like the higher price better conveyed the value there. And then it's just kind of snowballed from there. I started, sorry, camera's taking a dip. started elk hunting more seriously at that time, and really was able to learn at the feet of an expert elk hunter. Idaho is generally just an over-the-counter elk hunting state. It's public land. There's a lot of it, but there's a lot of hunters too. And so being able to call effectively really creates an opportunity for you to set yourself apart, to have more elk encounters, more opportunities. And when you're hunting with a bow and trying to get within, 40, 50 yards of an elk who's wired to survive, any advantage you can get is well worth it. So that was 5 years ago, almost to the dot, I guess 5 years and a month. And since then, it's just been a journey that I've kind of taken along with all of our app users, is that, always considered myself a hunter, but only then really started to dive into the archery elk hunting side, which has snowballed into a few other things.
Yeah. So one, that's an incredible story there. It's just being passionate about the space, being like, hey, I want to help educate other individuals that may have been in a position like me once upon a time of like how to call, how to do this. What are some of those, like you said, there's 5 distinct sounds, or like maybe, and I imagine that's just scratching the surface. I imagine that gets more and more complex, but like, help me understand as a layman, somebody who's never been elk hunting, like what are those sounds like? Well, you don't have to make them, but I'm like, what are those categories?
Tube and a mouth reed to make those sounds. I'm totally slacking on that front, but so the app now has 21 different elk sounds, but I mean, the 2 basic sounds, cows make a wide variety, but it's generally some form or variation of a mew. And then bulls bugle is kind of what you'd call it. And the variations in those sounds, we call them different things. There's a challenge bugle, a location bugle, a roundup bugle, but they're all just reflections of a change in tone and emotion in the sound. And so we call them one thing when really the elk communicating, through that sound at an emotional level. So a location bugle is a bull elk who's out sounding off, maybe just letting other elk in the area know where he is, trying to let cow elk in the area know to come check him out. And when you bugle initially in the mountains, you've started your hunt and you're trying to locate elk, you'll use a location bugle, and oftentimes you'll get a bull elk to answer in the distance with a similar type response. And so kind of a non-aggressive, kind of a high note that carries. And then there are just the variations turn from that towards sort of the level of aggression. If you're challenging a bull who has cows or who thinks you're coming to take the cows that are with him, there's a lot more emotion. It's higher volume, shorter length, growlier. Maybe a bull feels threatened and rounds up the cows that are with him. There's a certain sound that you make that kind of, sort of a nervous edge to it, right? It's not as aggressive, but it's still urgent. And anyways, as you start to spend more time in the elk woods and get familiar with those scenarios, and kind of, I really like to just think about it and how I would feel if I were that elk in that situation, and really try to let that emotion transfer through into the calling.
Yeah.
And the cow elk kind of have similar sounds that are, not really bugles, but more short kind of mews that also convey emotion. They're social creatures, so they're communicating spacing when they're feeding. And cows, if their calves stray a little far, they call them back urgently. They might make a certain sound as they're approaching a bull to, effectively say, I'm coming in. And anyways, it's so unique.
No, this is fascinating. It's because I've got a lot of friends who are hunters. I grew up in Alaska. I mean, yeah. I grew up on the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. So, the moose hunting season was always something that folks always talked about, or if they got one or if they didn't. And I always kind of knew there was various like calls. I know people clack like antlers or make sounds together too. So what does that do? Is that like a fight, or is that like rubbing up against a tree? Like I imagine there's a diversity of sounds for that as well.
Yeah, no, you're simulating what elk really do. And so sometimes packing a pair of elk antlers around is a lot of weight when you're backpack hunting. So I know some guys will take mule deer antlers and still try to imitate some of that rattling, but yeah, might imitate a fight that's going on. Oftentimes when I'm calling elk and creating some sort of a challenge scenario or a breeding sequence between elk, bull elk will rake their antlers against trees to display both for the challenger bull as well as for the cow. And so, you might just get a big stick and, scrape the stick up and down, some trees or branches, or you might break it. One thing that a lot of new elk hunters don't realize is that elk are big creatures and they make a lot of sounds. And as hunters, you're always super worried about being stealthy, right? You want to be quiet. But an elk sound with an elk bugle, like a vocalization, without the non-vocal elk sounds, is weird to an elk. They expect to hear an elk popping branches, kicking rocks as they're walking along a trail. And if you're bugling, but you're not imitating other elk sounds, then I think you're missing out on an opportunity to really create that realistic picture.
Oh, that's awesome. And so is the app centered just around like bigger game like elk and deer, or do you have a diversity of sounds from all, because people shoot all kinds of animals, right?
Yeah, no, and the vocalizations are a tool to lure animals in of a lot of different species. So after we developed the Elk Nut app, which is elk specific, we ultimately developed 3 others, one for turkeys, ducks, and white-tailed deer. And we're also working on a 5th one for geese. And so each app follows the same model of partnering with an expert caller who's built a brand in the industry and that has an interest in growing with us, participating in the marketing of the app, sharing insight, ultimately has the vision of helping more hunters become successful. And then we set up a recording session, pull that content into the app, video, audio, written content, and then publish that out. So our apps have been separated by species type.
And I've been wanting to ask this question as well. So like different species of like ducks are all across the United States. Now, there's people all across the United States and they have different accents or dialect. People from Boston talk different than people in Louisiana. Do ducks do the same thing, or do like elk do the same thing? Is like an elk in Colorado different than an elk, say in Idaho, in any reasonable way as far as calling them?
Yeah, that's a pretty nuanced question, actually. So generally, the duck that the sounds that people use for duck calling are mallard sounds typically. So a mallard duck sound is going to be consistent across the country, especially because those ducks generally are, there's some local ducks, right? That's, you see geese all over Boise that never leave, but waterfowl will typically migrate. And so the mallards that folks are seeing in Minnesota might end up in, Arkansas, Texas, et cetera. And those ducks are, making those same sounds. Rocky Mountain elk generally, sound the same as Roosevelt elk. And there's also Thule elk as well in California, hunted on a very limited scale. Generally, on our app, we don't differentiate between Roosevelt and Rocky Mountain elk hunting tactics. Roosevelts are Washington and Oregon. There might be some Rosies over in California as well. But typically, we don't do a lot in differentiating between the different species and their sounds. They generally have so much overlap. Although I imagine somebody who hunts Roosevelt elk all the time probably has some insight there that we, as the occasional Roosevelt elk hunter, but primarily the Rocky Mountain elk hunter, may not even perceive. With turkeys, there's the North American Grand Slam, 4 species of turkeys, and they all kind of use the same sounds, but they will use them differently. So like a Merriam's turkey, like we have in Idaho, calls a lot more than Osceola turkey that they have in Southern Florida. And so there are some strategies on our turkey calling app that are designed specifically for that species, but the actual sounds to imitate are going to be consistent across them.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate that answer. That did get into some details. I learned that there's multiple species of turkeys that are, maybe outside of what Purdue makes around Thanksgiving time.
Yeah. We definitely something that I'm passionate about, and an exciting thing for me. As I think people who don't hunt sometimes miss out on realizing that hunters are all about conservation. They spend more money than any other group on conserving and preserving wildlife. And I know it seems kind of, like an oxymoron or just not a good fit that somebody who kills these animals actually cares about and appreciate them. But, we really try as hunters to help develop the population. And when we harvest an animal, to respect it by, making use of the meat and parts of the body to ensure that we've, we're not wasting. So it's meaningful.
Yeah, there's an interesting, because I've had some long conversations with folks, and again, I'm not a hunter myself. I'm aspirationally, I'd like to be. And so I want to get into that in a minute. And I want you to try to help me like look at that path of how I might start. But there's an interesting thing when I've talked to people who oppose hunting. A lot of it is around taking the life of another animal, right? And that being viewed as kind of a quote unquote selfish act. And then there's also this conflation of how it fits into poaching, which is like a selfish act in and of itself. And so it's like, there's a scale, right? The most selfish is taking it when it's illegal. And then kind of still in the selfish Venn diagram would be taking the life, even though it is legal, they are morally opposed to going out and hunting. But the perspective you're offering is actually interested in conservation, interested in the aggregate well-being of the animals, and including that habitat, so you can continue to have things to hunt, and they're likely also delicious.
Yeah.
So like, help maybe somebody who's listening to this, maybe opposed on from a moral perspective around hunting. What would you say around that as somebody who's done this throughout the course of your life?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I mean, if somebody likes to eat meat in any form, or even eats products that are farmed, then lives are taken in that process. And I think as a hunter, we take on the responsibility of ending that life of what we consume and what we use, rather than outsourcing it to somebody else to do. And so I can totally understand if somebody is morally opposed to taking a life, and that translates to the food that they eat and the products that they use. And I think that's a really defensible position. I mean, it's consistent with behavior. But if someone likes to eat hamburgers or steak, like, there's a life that's ending there, and the fact that you're not the one that's ending it, I don't think excuses the behavior. And my personal position on humans is we're stewards of the earth that we have, and regardless of one's view on how the earth came to be, we're in a position as that dominant predator to use the resources of the earth in a way that's sustainable. And I would put out there, I would posit that the history of kind of organized hunting and the conservation that goes along with that has led to the development and increase of deer, elk, antelope, moose populations in the lower 48. Before those regulations were in place, I think there were behaviors that led to the reduction of those numbers. But once there was some organization there, the animals have in a lot of ways thrived. And I think we as a people, our species, we need that to continue to happen. And as long as I know, humans have eaten meat and need that protein to survive, and maybe not as much as we're accustomed to eating as a society. But as a hunter, you take on that responsibility of ending that life, and you try to do it in the most ethical, most respectful way. And not every hunter processes their own game, but I think there's that desire and that endeavor for. I think most hunters, if they had the ability, would or would like to learn more about that. And we have a cold room that I built in our garage. We process the animal from field to fork. We age the meat, we cut it up, we wrap it up, we prepare it, try to use as much as we can for our family. What we can't use, we've got a process to convert that meat over to dog food for the fur babies at the house. And I really take a lot of pride in trying to use that as a way to respect the life that was given so my family could continue to live.
I love it. What a cool perspective, man. Thank you for expanding on that a little bit more. And, it's an interesting conversation. I don't think it's one that's ever going to go away because people are going to feel the way they feel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's some other, positions on trophy hunting, or like you were mentioning, the, poaching and all of the ills that go along with that. And, I think that there's a general consensus among hunters, like there seems to be among just people in general. Good people, I think, usually can find some common ground on issues and find some things that make sense.
Okay. So if I were to say, hey, I want to get into archery hunting and I want to go after some elk, I want to go after some deer, give me some tips. Like, where do I need to start as somebody who's never done it before? Give me that trajectory here. What should I expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So Idaho is one of the best states for hunters for new hunters to get involved in hunting. It's not difficult to get a tag in the general season for deer or elk. The other species, moose, antelope, pronghorn, it's a little bit tougher to get those tags, but very easy for an Idaho resident to get a deer and elk tag. And so the opportunities are there. And you want to make sure that when you go out with that bow and arrow, that you're confident in your ability, and that when you pull the trigger, you can make a clean, ethical kill. So I would say first thing would be to head down to a bow shop in the Valley, Dead on Archery and Boise on Fairview, Archery Central in Caldwell. There are a few other shops in the Valley selling bows that have great people there that will take you through that thought process that you need to think about to get a bow that fits your goals. And even if you wanted to just start target shooting and shoot a recurve or a traditional bow rather than a compound, you could do that for a while. But there are good compound bows that, regardless of physical ability, you can start pulling back and learning about, setting up the right length of an arrow, the right weight of your arrow, the right poundage on your bow, and start practicing. Maybe shoot a few arrows at the shop until you're comfortable, and then get a target and shoot it at home, or head to the hills in a safe spot and just start getting some reps in. And as you start to get that muscle memory in place, and it doesn't take much to be able to consistently hit where you're aiming from 20, 30, 40 yards. Out beyond that takes a lot more time and effort. And I think there's a big debate among hunters about whether a 40+ yard shot is something that you want to consistently do with a bow. But that would be step number one.
And then how many, I mean, it's going to be different for everybody. I get it. But like, I've told people who are trying to get into golf, you need to go to the driving range 10 to 20 times before you ever step on the course. If you've never played before, you need to take lessons. You need to get out there. You need to, at least, because you're not going to be able to hang with the pace of play. Right. Mm-hmm. I imagine if somebody who is inexperienced with a bow found themselves lucky enough to be in a position to take a shot on one, and they hadn't taken the time to really be dialed in, that they can make an unethical shot on an animal and potentially hurt it or injure it, or, cause a lot of issue there. What's your perspective on how many arrows that might be, or how somebody can evaluate if they're actually ready to go out?
Yeah. I mean, I think you want to see that consistent behavior, whether that's shooting, a few arrows a day, or, arrows in bunches once a week. I think you want to see that consistency. And I don't know if there's a set number, but I think you probably at least want to shoot a few hundred arrows, and to run 10 arrows through your bow. I mean, that doesn't take long. I think you want to give yourself a few months of consistent shooting. You don't want to pick up a bow for the first time the week before the season starts and try to go out and hunt something. I think it's also important to simulate a little bit of high pressure situations. So whether that's betting, your buddy $10, or, saying that if you don't hit where you're aiming, you got to skip dessert, or, something like that, to create some incentive where you're dealing with a little bit of nerves. Maybe you go shoot, you shoot at home on your own, but then once a week you go shoot at the shop where there's other people around. I think something like that is really important too. There's nothing to really replicate that feeling, when you're actually shooting at an animal and kind of contemplating all that brings with it. It's a lot emotionally, but you definitely want to put in some time to try to get your heart rate up and shoot with the blood pumping.
So I was in my preparation to speaking with you today. I watched some Meat Eater with Steve Rinella.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of his, by the way. And I actually have all 3 volumes of How to Hunt, Kill, and Clean Game from him. I'm a fan of his from some podcasts that he's done. I love his like philosophical approach to hunting, and his unique ways to like cook different stuff off the animal.
About using all parts of the animal, right?
Yeah. But I find it so interesting, like the process of just like being out there and like with a couple of buddies, like oftentimes he's not hunting alone, and there's this glassing. He says glassing over and over again, but sitting there kind of at the top of a hill, like looking down, like take me through that like camaraderie that comes with the sport, or whether it's be hunting or fishing, like your perspective, and then who you go out with when you do these things. Are you flying solo?
Yeah, awesome questions, man. And some of my favorite to think about. That feeling that I experience on the opening day of archery season every year, um, it's really hard to describe, but it's a feeling that I look forward to every year. And it's almost like, and it means a lot coming from a guy who's got a really solid home. I supportive parents, loving wife, bunch of kids. Like my home and my house is a really safe, awesome place that I feel very comfortable in. I feel equally as comfortable with the bow in my hand on the mountain on the opening day of archery season. There's just something elemental, like, I don't know if it's primal or like, but it just feels like me and my ancestors have been doing this for millennia, and I was made to do this. And I think a lot of hunters can really relate with that. And I think a lot of people in general, when you're engaged in an act that connects you kind of with history, whether that's growing your own food, harvesting game, building your own home. Like, I don't know, there's just something really natural about that I absolutely love. So I love thinking about that feeling of being in the mountains. And I typically share that. I typically go with family. I've got brothers and brothers-in-law that I spend a lot of time hunting in the mountains with. And as my children have gotten older, I've started to take them out with me. And in Idaho, a 10-year-old can hunt big game. So two of my boys this year are old enough to hunt big game. And some of my best memories as a parent, and really in the course of my life, have been spent with my oldest son, Luke, on the mountain, doing what we both really enjoy. And some of those days are spent, not seeing anything, not having shot opportunities. But when you're with your 10-year-old son and you both have heavy packs on your back and you set out, at the top of this, this ridge, I remember a day where I had underestimated the distance that we needed to cover. And it was in September when the mountains in Idaho can be unpredictable. And we started off, and there's some great technology to help you navigate the woods, but my GPS wasn't working. And so I got in a rain snowstorm. We were 2 or 3 miles into this hike, and we had started up high and we're hiking down, and went down some pretty steep stuff. And we were wet and cold, and we kind of hunkered down to see if we could kind of get our bearings about where we were. And I asked my son, I'm like, all right, so, we can keep going ahead as planned, or we can kind of bail out, head back to the truck. And I just remember, him looking over to me and saying, Dad, we can do this. We can get through this snow and rain, and let's stick to the plan. And as a parent, like when your kid's doing hard stuff and they make the choice that you hope they make, like, man, that just
fires you up. Yeah.
It just hits you hard in the feels. And so he and I have had some great experiences like that. And it's meant a lot to me to be able to share those memories with him, and have had some great experiences like that with my brothers, packing out an elk and at 3 a.m. where we've both hit that physical level, where you just don't think that you can go any further, and yet you continue to go. Pushing those physical limits through that hunting experience also creates a special bond that you just can't replicate. I mean, I guess you can replicate it in certain things, but it's unusual. You don't have that opportunity every day.
I love it. Last interesting question I wanted to ask you here before we wrap up today was, you are in the hunting technology space. You're essentially, I mean, you're focused in kind of like the learning, and then there's also an ecosystem around you. I know there's podcasts and blogs and all these, interesting resources that people can find. They can also find a link when this podcast goes out. I'll include the links to all your stuff
Cool.
here as well, so people can find you. But like, there's an interesting conversation when we talk about that technology available and its use in something so primal like hunting. Right. So the difference between, say, a recurve bow and a compound bow, like I think that's a logical jump, right?
Yep.
Okay, this is more accurate. There's more, ethical, whatever. But then there's all the GPS technology, the geocache, all these bolt-ons of this and that you can put on different things. What's your perspective in technology used out in the field? And like, are there things that you feel like is like kind of unfair, or maybe people shouldn't be using, or maybe if you're willing to make a bold claim like that?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I think we take for granted the amount of technology that we have. When you're talking about how our ancestors did it, they did it a little bit differently than we are. And Idaho actually has kind of some interesting debates about traditional weapons and what is, what should be used in an archery season, what should be used for a muzzle loader, as opposed to a center fire rifle, and what kind of technology can be added onto those. And, I haven't really engaged in the debate, and I respect what people feel comfortable using. I love trail cameras. I don't use them to like alert me to when animals are moving through so I can go up and hunt them right at that instant. But it's fun for me to be able to see animals in their natural habitat and what they're doing. And it's exciting for me as someone who enjoys pursuing game to be able to see that. And so that's an aspect of technology that I really enjoy. And there's good tech on bows. It's kind of like golf clubs. Like, you don't notice a difference year to year in the tech, but you look back 10 years and the compound bows we're shooting today are so much more efficient and easier to use than compound bows 10 years ago. And, I'm not a traditional bow hunter. Maybe someday I'll do that. I think those traditional bow hunters can probably have the superior claim about those that are killing them every year with that equipment are definitely the ultimate hunters. But I kind of say to each his or her own, as long as you're abiding by the state laws that you have. I'm not going to call something unethical or, too much technology, but the reason I chose bow hunting and do that more than rifle hunting, although I rifle hunt a lot with my kids because they're too small to pull back a bow to lethal poundage. The reason I bow hunt is just because I love the space from other people and the ability and the necessity to get so close to the animals that we're hunting.
I love it. Well, good, man. Hey, we're coming up on time. So if do me a favor here, shout out the best places to find you on social media, websites for your company, and then anything else that you have coming up that's interesting or that we should look out for.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man. So on Instagram, handle is HuntFit Esquire. I do the Facebook thing. I kind of reserve that for family stuff, so you won't see me on there as much. On LinkedIn as well, and use that a lot. Just Tayler W. Tibbitts. GotGameTechnologies.com, GotGameTech.com is our website. Empire Title Idaho, if you have questions on the title and escrow side, that's our company there. Also, that Empire's present on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So yeah, that's how to get in touch with me. You can shoot me a message. Happy to answer questions about anything we've talked about. And was there another part to that? I might have.
No, not anything that you're excited about coming up.
Oh yeah. So we're always working on stuff within the app development company. We've got a couple of new apps that are coming out. Goose Calling app is a week away, so making a big push on that. We have another one in development that is connected to all this, but is unique, and so we'll have more to come on that. Otherwise it's August 5th, and the first hunting season for me opens up on August 30th. So we're literally counting down the days and really trying to put in the time and be ready to go.
I love it, my man. All right. Hey, well, thanks for spending some time with me today. Loved having you on the podcast. Sounds like your apps are available in all those app stores as well. So get out there and go find those Got Game apps so you can learn to call them elk and deer and geese and ducks and all that fun stuff, man. And I'm looking forward to next time you and I run into one another, and definitely send me updates as you guys release stuff. I'd love to share it with the audience as well.
Hey, you got it, man. Thank you so much, Jake. Great to chat with you.
All right, Tayler, take care.